Hi, I'm Aundrea Cline-Thomas. ISPOR focuses on key issues impacting healthcare all around the world. In this segment, we're going to talk about policy developments with Andrew York. Thank you so much for being here. Our first question is about what is a prescription drug affordability board?
A prescription drug affordability board is a new policy that started to come out in states. So it's usually very state specific. And it's a separate independent entity dedicated to making prescription drugs more affordable for that state. I would say, each state kind of treats their affordability board a little bit differently. So it's kind of up to each state on how they manage it. But basically, they can implement policies to make drugs more affordable.
And so, how is it working?
A lot of them are on the newer side. So I think Maryland was the first one created in 2019. Since then, Colorado, Washington, Oregon, a number of different states have implemented them. And we're kind of at what I would say is the first step in the process. So one of the things that our board can do is something called cost review studies. And basically, it allows us to do a deep dive and understand if a drug is causing affordability challenges. So that's where a lot of the boards are now. Then after that study, they can start to implement policies. And I think those are still down the road. So,
Why are we seeing more states form these boards?
it's a great question. And I think, we see it at the federal level as well, but prescription drug prices and affordability just seem to be a hot button issue. Obviously, it's a very specific subset of the healthcare market, but it's the one that patients feel the most. They're going to the pharmacy and handing over their hard-earned dollars. So it's a very important issue for patients, and I think that's just made it one of the top topics, as folks look at how to make prescription drugs more affordable for patients. So it's one of the tools that states have, and I think we'll continue to see them grow. So.
Why are cell and gene therapies a priority topic for PDABs?
So I wouldn't say that cell and gene therapies are a priority topic per se, but I would say cell and gene therapies are a priority topic for states as a whole. When we talk about cell and gene therapies, we're talking about very expensive drugs, usually curative drugs, usually drugs for a small patient population. And this is the thing that really does keep kind of Medicaid departments up at night. And as much as prescription drug affordability boards can serve as kind of subject matter experts to a state, that's kind of how they get looped in, is helping them navigate these very difficult and complex issues around prescription drug affordability.
What would you say about the structure of these boards that make them effective? Like if other states want to adopt it, what does the foundation have to look like for it to be effective?
Yeah. So one of the things that's nice about Maryland is it's an independent agency, but each state structures them a little bit differently. A lot of them, they'll be housed in an insurance administration or groups that do different data collection and things like that. So I think each one has its own strengths and weaknesses. But I think for a successful board, you do want it to be an independent agency, and as much expertise as you can provide is I think, the best. Ours is almost like a drug pricing policy shop for the state. So we help our executive branch and we help our legislators understand these extremely complex issues when it comes to drug reimbursement and pricing. And I think that's one of the big values that we provide, is just that expertise. And I think that's one thing that other states can do to succeed.
And what excites you moving forward?
I think it's just an exciting time in drug pricing overall. Obviously, there's a lot of work happening at the federal level. And as I mentioned, the states are now getting to the point where we're actually doing the work. So we've completed or starting to do our cost review studies, and then we actually start to get to implement policies as well. So, states are the laboratory of democracy and healthcare policy, and I think you'll start to see some really interesting stuff come out of these states.
We continue the conversation with Darius Lakdawala.
There's been a lot of consternation about rising healthcare costs in the U.S. over the past several decades. But what really matters is we need to make sure that consumers are getting value for money and that patients are receiving the value that they pay for. And health economics and outcomes research is fundamentally geared around the question of finding the value of new medical technologies and ensuring that those technologies are put to the highest value uses so consumers do get what they pay for. We think about health technologies as producing good health. That's pretty easy to understand. Good health is very complicated, though, so we need some way of structuring it. And usually, a simple way of structuring it is to think about there being life expectancy, or the quantity of life, and then the quality of life. Just those two dimensions get us pretty far. And so we know how to measure life expectancy. That's the easy part. Measuring quality of life tends to be harder. But the good news is this is a problem that health economists have been thinking about for probably 50 years. And so we've made a lot of progress on how to measure quality in the most reliable way possible. And that helps us understand how to measure the value of new medical technologies as well.
And so, how do you know it's working? What does success look like? How do you measure that?
I think success looks like the targeting of new medical technologies and investments in new medical technologies towards the diseases that matter most to people. So the technologies ought to be addressing unmet needs for patients. They ought to be changing the nature of healthcare, and they ought to be worth it in a very basic sense to the patients and employers and consumers that are paying for it. And that's ultimately the goal of all of this.
And how do you evaluate or measure health benefits? And how does HEOR help?
In thinking about quality of life, which is the hard part, usually we're thinking about trying to understand how people perceive their own circumstances. We do have to think about how to measure these things. And that is a necessary condition. It's not so easy. But fielding surveys to people where we help them understand what their current health is, what their health might be if a major illness befell them, help them understand the scenarios. One challenge that economists have faced is that traditional methods of economic analysis have discriminated against people who are very sick and disabled. And the reason why is that we think about those people as having lower quality of life, and therefore extending their lives is viewed as less valuable. And many people correctly object to that on ethical grounds. But fortunately, more recent methods and innovations in economics have found ways to rigorously measure value without discriminating. And what I've done with my colleagues is show that if you account for the fact that improving health is the most valuable to the people who have less of it, it turns out that you no longer discriminate. And that's a really intuitive concept. It's just like somebody who lives in a tiny apartment places more value on a 500 square foot extension than somebody who lives in a capacious suburban estate. And bringing that same idea to health leads to the conclusion that it's actually really valuable to improve health for those among us who are most vulnerable, frail, and sick. And that undoes the, I think, harmful discrimination that was present in prior standard economic approaches.
And as this grows, what excites you about what we can do in the future?
I think health economics is becoming really pivotal in the American policy context because increasingly there are questions about how to set the prices of new medical technologies. And it's crucial for us to get that right. If we set the prices too high, there may be problems where people can't access valuable new technologies. If we set the prices too low, we're going to discourage investments to develop new medical technologies for our kids and grandkids. So we need to get this right. And really the whole world depends on us to get this right because the United States remains the engine of pharmaceutical innovation. We account for the lion's share of pharmaceutical revenues because of our size and our income. So what we do has global implications.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Aundrea Cline-Thomas. For more key topics in healthcare, go to ISPOR.org.